Welcome to First Sleep Aid, calm stories to help you unwind, learn, and fall asleep. From true crime to curious facts and thoughtful ideas, always softly spoken. Subscribe now and take a deep breath. You're in good hands.
So let's set the scene. London, 1888. It's this sprawling giant, isn't it? The heart of a massive empire full of Victorian confidence and, well, ambition.
Absolutely. But if you scratched just below that shiny surface, you found a city split right down the middle. You had the glitz of the West End and then the East End, specifically Whitechapel. A completely different world.
Whitechapel. Yeah, can you paint a picture of that for us? What was it actually like?
Oh, it was intense. Think 80,000 people packed into these decaying streets and alleyways. The air itself was thick,
Yeah.
coal smoke, awful sanitation, cheap gin, smell of sheer survival, really.
Grim. So families crammed into single rooms, disease everywhere.
Exactly. Basic dignity was a luxury most couldn't afford. It was this stark, almost unbelievable contrast to the wealth just a few miles away. And it was a place fueled by desperation, especially after dark.
Yeah, particularly for women, right?
Yeah.
Forced into impossible situations just to find the money for a bed for the night.
Precisely. A world that the powerful, the wealthy, largely chose to ignore. It was like this festering wound, hidden away, but right there in the heart of the empire.
And it's into this pressure cooker that a series of murders begins. Murders that didn't just horrify London, but burn themselves into history.
Right. And it's important to say violence wasn't exactly unknown in the East End. Life could be incredibly cheap there.
Sure, it was a tough place.
But these killings, they were different. There was a savagery, a kind of ritualistic mutilation, and no obvious motive like robbery or, personal revenge. It felt like something else entirely.
Something monstrous emerging from the shadows. Not just killing, but obliterating.
That's a good way to put it. And that's what we want to explore in this deep dive, isn't it? Not just the grisly details, but the world these crimes came from.
Yeah, the social fabric, the inequality, and crucially, the lives of the women who were targeted. Because they were individuals, weren't they? Not just statistics or symbols.
Absolutely vital to remember. The press and, well, much of society back then just dismissed them, labeled them as fallen women, morally corrupt. We need to look past that.
See them as people caught in incredibly difficult circumstances.
Exactly. Understand their lives beyond those labels.
And the reaction from the rest of London? It was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Horror, definitely. Disgust.
But also this kind of morbid curiosity, a fascination. It forced people, even in the comfortable West End, to confront the reality of the poverty and desperation they usually ignored.
Like the curtain on the city's dark side. The glittering empire had these deep, dark shadows, and suddenly, everyone had to look.
And the first act in this terrifying drama involved Marianne Nichols, August 31st, 1888. Early hours. Her body's found on Bucks Row.
Just a narrow street in Whitechapel, found by ordinary working men, wasn't it? Charles Cross and Robert Paul.
That's right, on their way to work, and their first thought that she was just drunk, passed out, which tells you a lot about what was common sight back then.
But it was much, much worse. Tell us about Marianne, or Polly, as she was known.
Polly Nichols, 43 years old. Her life story is, well, it's one of hardship, instability. She'd been married, had 5 children, but things had fallen apart. Poverty, maybe alcohol, the pressures just ground her down.
And that night, she couldn't afford a bed.
No. Turned away from her lodging house on Thrall Street around 2:30 a.m. because she didn't have the 4 pence needed. Her last known words were to the watchman. Quite defiant, actually.
What did she say?
Something like, "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." That jolly bonnet. Maybe just a small attempt to hold on to some dignity.
Heartbreaking. And the initial reaction to her death was quite muted, wasn't it?
Tragically muted. It really shows how little value was placed on the laugh of a poor woman in the East End back then.
So, what did the police find at the scene?
It was stark. Her throat had been cut twice, deep, vicious wounds left to right, and her abdomen. There were several jagged cuts, one deep one running downwards from the breastbone.
But not the extreme mutilation seen later.
Not quite. Her intestines were still in place, which led to some later theories about maybe the killer being interrupted or perhaps still developing his methods. But significantly, there wasn't much blood on her clothes.
Meaning she was likely killed right where she was found.
Almost certainly. And the post-mortem by Dr. Llewellyn noted the sharpness, the precision of the throat wounds. It wasn't just a random frenzied attack, it was controlled.
Polly Nichols. The start of the pattern.
The horrifying start. And then, just over a week later, September 8th, the fear escalates dramatically. Annie Chapman is found.
Where was she discovered?
Around 6 a.m., in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, another resident, John Davis, found her. And the scene, it was considerably worse than Buck's Row. Annie was on her back, legs drawn up. Her face was swollen, dark, suggesting strangulation first. Her throat was cut so deeply it reached the spine. And her abdomen, it was laid wide open. Part of her uterus was missing.
My God. A clear escalation in the brutality.
A terrifying escalation. It sent a whole new wave of fear rippling out from Whitechapel.
And Annie Chapman. What do we know about her life?
She was 47. Like Polly, she'd seen better days. She'd been married, had children, some stability. But tragedies hit, her marriage failed, a child died, she struggled with drink, poor health.
Ended up in the lodging houses, too.
Yes. Surviving hand to mouth, selling crochet work, resorting to prostitution. And just like Polly the night before her death, she was turned away because she didn't have the lodging money.
It's the same tragic story. Did she say anything?
Her last reported words were to the lodging housekeeper, something like, "I'll be back soon. I've made a few pennies." Those few pennies
Cost her life. And the nature of her injuries. The missing organ. That really alarmed the police, didn't it?
It did. It suggested something beyond just rage. The police surgeon, Dr. George Baxter Phillips, he looked at how the abdomen was open, the removal of the uterus, and he started suspecting the killer had some anatomical knowledge, maybe surgical skill.
That's a chilling thought. And the location, a backyard. Riskier than Buck's Row, surely.
Definitely riskier. Barely concealed, yet nobody heard a thing. No screams, no struggle reported, which is deeply unsettling. Was the killer that stealthy, that skilled? Or was the area just so accustomed to noise and trouble that nothing registered?
Either way, it shows an increasing boldness, doesn't it?
Boldness and a refinement of this horrific violence. Annie Chapman's death was really the point where people realized this wasn't isolated. This was a sequence.
And the public reaction changed.
Dramatically, panic started to properly set in. People demanded action. There were protests, calls for better policing. The Home Secretary offered a reward, which the police had initially resisted.
And the newspapers.
They latched onto it. This is when you start seeing names like the Whitechapel murderer appearing regularly. The legend, the fear was starting to build. The name Jack the Ripper wasn't far off.
Then came the night of September 30th, the so-called double event. 2 victims in one night. First, Elizabeth Stride.
That's right. Found around 1 a.m. in Dutfield Yard off Burner Street. It was a dark, narrow passage. Louis Diemschutz, a steward at a nearby club, found her when his horse shied as he drove his cart into the yard.
And her injuries.
Her throat was cut, deeply left to right, just like the others, but that was it.
No mutilations?
No abdominal injuries. Her clothes weren't really disturbed. Her face was even described as looking quite peaceful, which immediately raised questions.
Had the killer been interrupted?
That was the immediate theory. Diemschutz arriving might have scared him off before he could continue.
Tell us about Elizabeth Stride. Was her background similar to the others?
A bit different, actually. She was 49, born in Sweden, emigrated to London, spoke with an accent. Some accounts suggest she tried to present herself as slightly better off, maybe not a common prostitute. They called her Long Liz because she was tall.
Had she struggled too?
Oh yes, history of illness, venereal disease. She'd been married, separated, worked various jobs, drifted through the East End lodging house scene like the others.
Was she seen with anyone that night?
Yes, witnesses reported seeing her near the yard shortly before 1 a.m. with a man. Descriptions were vague, though shortish, dark hair, maybe a peaked cap. No clear view of his face. And crucially, again, no one heard a scream.
So the lack of mutilation. It confused things. Could it have been someone else?
People wondered. A copycat. A different motive. But the throat wound was so similar. And then, less than an hour later, the discovery of Catherine Eddowes completely changed the picture.
Because she was mutilated.
Horrifically so. It strongly suggested the killer was interrupted attacking Stride, became enraged or frustrated, and immediately went hunting for another victim nearby.
Making Elizabeth Stride the Ripper's unlucky one, as some called her. Not because she survived, but because she died before the full horror unfolded.
Exactly. It also showed something chilling. The killer didn't need time to mutilate. He chose to. When interrupted, he just killed quickly and moved on.
Which brings us to Catherine Eddowes. Found less than an hour later, you said.
Yes, around 1:45 a.m., but this time in Mitre Square. which is significant because Mitre Square is actually in the city of London, not Whitechapel. A different police jurisdiction. The city police, not the Met.
So the killer crossed a boundary, and the scene there.
It was one of extreme brutality, even worse than Annie Chapman's. Catherine Eddowes was on her back, her face terribly slashed and mutilated, throat cut savagely. Her abdomen was completely opened, eviscerated.
Eviscerated.
Meaning her intestines had been pulled out, draped over her right shoulder, and organs were missing her left kidney, and a significant part of her womb had been taken.
Taken from the scene. That's incredibly specific.
Chillingly specific. It went way beyond just frenzied violence. It suggested a purpose, a collection almost.
And Catherine Eddowes herself, what was her story?
She was 46, described as having a sharp wit, apparently a good singer, a resilient character despite the hardships. She lived with a partner, John Kelly, and like the others, moved through that world of casual labor in lodging houses.
How did she end up in Mitre Square that night?
Tragically, she actually been arrested earlier that evening for being drunk and disorderly. She was held at Bishopsgate Police Station.
So she was in custody.
For a few hours, yes. They let her go around 1 a.m. once she'd sobered up. She gave her name as Mary Kelly, perhaps trying to avoid trouble. She walked out into the night just as Elizabeth Stride was being murdered nearby and walked straight into the path of the killer.
Unbelievable timing. And Mitre Square itself, what kind of place was it?
A small, quiet, enclosed square, sort of a dead end. The police constable who found her, Edward Watkins, had actually walked through the square just 15 minutes earlier and seen nothing.
15 minutes. The speed is terrifying.
Incredible speed and precision. Watkins found her, raised the alarm. The city police surgeon, Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown, examined her. He, too, was struck by the apparent skill in the organ removal, echoing Dr. Phillips's view about anatomical knowledge.
And there was something else found nearby, wasn't there? Something linked to Eddowes?
Yes, a crucial and controversial piece of evidence. A piece of Catherine Eddowes' blood-stained apron was found a short walk away in a doorway on Golston Street.
And above it.
Chalked on the wall, a message. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. Spelled Juwes.
The Jews. What did that mean?
Nobody knows for sure. Endless debate. Was it the killer leaving a clue? Was it anti-Semitic comment meant to incite trouble or deflect blame onto the Jewish community in Whitechapel? Was it completely unrelated, just coincidental graffiti?
And wasn't there controversy about what happened to the message?
Huge controversy. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, arrived on the scene. Fearing anti-Jewish riots if the message became widely known at dawn, he ordered it to be washed off the wall before it could be properly photographed.
Destroying potential evidence.
Potentially vital evidence, a decision still debated today. But Warren's priority was preventing public disorder. Regardless, the Eddowes murder, the missing organs, the Golston Street graffito, it confirmed the pattern, the escalation, and the sheer terror of the killer's campaign.
Which leads us to the last of the generally accepted victims, the canonical five, Mary Jane Kelly.
Mary Jane Kelly. Her death marks a horrifying climax, November 9th, 1888. And this one was different in several ways.
How so? Location.
Yes, primarily location. She was the only one killed indoors. In her own small room, number 13 Miller's Court, which was just off Dorset Street, notoriously one of the roughest streets in London.
And being indoors. That changed things.
It seems it did. The killer wasn't rushed by fear of discovery in the same way as in a public yard or street. He had time. And the scene inside that room, it was beyond horrific. The mutilations were far, far more extensive than anything seen before.
Worse than Eddowes.
Far worse. Mary Kelly was younger than the others, probably only in her mid-20s. The landlord's assistant, Thomas Boyer, went to collect overdue rent, peered through the window, and saw, well, a scene of absolute carnage that reportedly sickened even hardened police officers.
Can you describe what was found?
It's difficult. Her face was essentially obliterated, hacked beyond recognition. Her throat was cut right down to the spine. Her body had been completely opened up, flayed in parts. Organs were removed and placed around the room, some beneath her head, some on a small table beside the bed. Her heart was missing entirely. It wasn't just murder, it was annihilation. Total destruction of the body and identity.
Just monstrous.
Yeah.
And Mary Jane Kelly herself? Do we know much about her? She seems more enigmatic than the others.
She is quite enigmatic. Likely Irish or Welsh heritage, she apparently spoke fluent Welsh, used several aliases. Stories about her past are conflicting. Some suggested she came from a better background, had lived in the West End, even Paris, maybe married a collier who died in an accident. It's hard to know what's true.
But by 1888, she was living in Miller's Court.
Yes, in extreme poverty, working as a prostitute like the others in this very dangerous area. She was described by some as attractive, maybe a bit fiery, more articulate than some women in her position.
What happened the night before she was found?
She'd been seen drinking late in a local pub, came home, likely with a man, descriptions vary, but possibly someone fairly well dressed. Later that night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., a neighbor heard a faint cry of, "Oh, murder!"
But nobody checked.
Apparently not. Sadly, such cries were not uncommon in Dorset Street. It was dismissed as just another drunken row. The next morning, Bowyer goes for the rent, sees the horror through the window, and the police are called.
And Mary Kelly's death. It's considered the end of the canonical series.
Generally, yes. There were other murders later, but none with the same clear hallmarks. Her killing felt like a peak, a terrible climax of violence. Why so extreme? Maybe the privacy of the room allowed the killer's full pathology to emerge. Maybe Kelly herself held some specific significance for him. We just don't know.
But it felt like more than just killing.
Yeah.
Domination. Transformation.
Utter domination, annihilation, a crime against identity itself. The horror of Miller's Court really sealed the Ripper legend.
So alongside the escalating violence, another strange element entered the story around this time, didn't it? The letters.
Ah, yes, the letters. A whole new layer of mystery and, frankly, manipulation. It started around September 27th, 1888, just before the double event. The Central News Agency received a letter.
What was it like?
Written in red ink. The handwriting was kind of blocky, maybe a bit rushed, and the tone. It was chillingly boastful, mocking the police for not catching him. It casually mentioned the killings, threatened more, and then came the signature.
The signature that changed everything.
Exactly. Signed, Jack the Ripper.
Was it taken seriously at first?
Initially, there was a lot of skepticism. The
Okay.
police and news agencies were already getting hoax letters. This could easily have been another one.
But something made them reconsider.
The timing was striking. It arrived before Stride and Eddowes were killed. And the letter contained a boast, something about clipping the next victim's ears off. When Eddowes was found, part of her ear had been severed. That detail wasn't widely known yet.
So it seemed like the writer had inside knowledge. Or was it just a lucky, grim guess?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The police decided to publicize it, partly hoping someone might recognize the handwriting. It was published on October 1st.
And the effect?
Immediate and massive. The name Jack the Ripper instantly caught on. It personified the terror. It gave the faceless killer a name, a brand almost. It shifted the narrative from the Whitechapel murderer, or the earlier suspect nickname Leather Apron, to this much more sinister, almost theatrical persona.
Did it help the investigation?
Probably not. The authenticity is still fiercely debated. Some think a journalist fabricated it to keep the story hot. Others believe it, or parts of it must have come from the killer. Modern analysis hasn't settled it, but its impact on the myth was undeniable.
It basically created the Ripper legend in print.
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
There were other letters claiming to be from him afterwards, some quite plausible, but none had the same earth-shattering effect as that first Dear Boss letter.
Then there was the Golston Street graffito after Eddowes' murder. We touched on that the Jews are the men.
Right, that cryptic message chalked above the piece of Eddowes' apron adds another layer of confusion. Was it the killer? A bystander? An attempt at misdirection? And Warren ordering it washed away? Another mystery within the mystery.
And wasn't there another really famous and frankly disturbing piece of communication?
Yes. The From Hell letter. This arrived on October 16th, sent not to the press or police, but to George Lusk.
Who was George Lusk?
He was the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of local businessmen trying to help the investigation, offering rewards, patrolling. They were quite prominent.
And the letter came with something else.
It came with a small box. Inside, preserved in spirits, was half of a human kidney.
A human kidney.
Yes. The letter itself is very different from Dear Boss. Much shorter, written in a more erratic, barely literate script. Full of misspellings and raw malice. No signature like Jack the Ripper.
What did it say?
Something like, "From hell, Mr. Lusk. So I send you half the kidney I took from one woman. Preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice." Just visceral, brutal language.
And the kidney. Was it real? Could it be linked to Eddowes?
It was examined by doctors. It was definitely human, likely from an adult woman. And it showed signs of Bright's disease, a kidney ailment. Catherine Eddowes was known to suffer from Bright's disease.
So it's possible it really was her kidney.
It's considered highly possible, perhaps the most likely piece of communication directly from the killer, though again, absolute proof is lacking. But the contrast with Dear Boss is fascinating.
How so?
Dear Boss feels almost slick, theatrical. It creates the name, the persona. From Hell feels raw, authentic, terrifyingly intimate. No branding, just pure menace and a gruesome trophy.
Two very different voices, both using words and, in one case, physical evidence as weapons.
Exactly. Both designed to amplify the terror gripping London.
And the press.
Hmm.
How did they handle all this? The murders, the letters.
Oh, the press went into overdrive, especially once the Jack the Ripper name took hold. It transformed the murders into a media spectacle.
Sensationalism.
Rampant sensationalism. Newspapers were fiercely competitive back then. This story was gold. They turned blood into headlines, corpses into columns, fear into sales. Circulation figures soared.
Did they stick to the facts?
Not always. Unverified witness statements, wild speculation, lurid, often inaccurate illustrations filled the pages. Each killing became the next installment in this horrifying saga.
So the press wasn't just reporting the story, they were actively shaping it.
Absolutely. They amplified the panic, fed the Ripper myth. There were even rumors then and now that some journalists might have forged letters just to keep the story going, to keep selling papers.
Publications like the Illustrated Police News, known for graphic images.
Precisely. Their depictions, while often fanciful, cemented the image of the killer and the horror in the public mind.
What was the effect of all this coverage on the ground, in Whitechapel and beyond?
It was huge. It led to public meetings, demands for action, vigilante groups formed like Lusk's committee, but it also further stigmatized the East End. Residents protested both the violence and the way their community was being portrayed as this monstrous place full of villains and victims.
So, a double-edged sword for the East End. Attention, but the wrong kind.
Very much so. Attention, yes, but through caricature and fear. And you have to wonder, was the killer watching all this? Reading the papers, maybe even enjoying the chaos he was creating?
It's a chilling thought. The press, in trying to capture the story, might have inadvertently given the Ripper the notoriety he craved, gave him a kind of immortality.
A perverse immortality built on ink and fear.
Beyond the famous Dear Boss and From Hell letters, were there many others?
Oh, hundreds. An absolute flood. Once the name Jack the Ripper was out there, it seemed like everyone wanted to write a letter.
What were they like? Mostly hoaxes.
The vast majority were clearly hoaxes. You had clumsy forgeries trying to mimic the Dear Boss style, often in red ink, typed letters, hasty, barely literate scrawls. The police had to try and categorize them: probable, possible, almost certainly fraudulent.
Just malicious pranks or something else.
A real mix. Some were clearly malicious, trying to frighten people or point suspicion at others. Some were morbid jokes. Some showed a really disturbing creativity, people sending in drawings, defiled playing cards, all claiming to be from the Ripper.
What does that flood of letters tell us about the public mood?
It reveals this intense public fascination, doesn't it? A morbid curiosity, maybe a desire to understand the killer, or even, bizarrely, to be him, just for a moment. The lines between victim, voyeur, and even perpetrator got really blurred in the public imagination.
Must have been a nightmare for the police.
An absolute nightmare. How do you find a potentially genuine communication from the killer buried in this mountain of hoaxes? It drained resources, sowed confusion, wasted precious time.
So the public's hunger for drama, fueled by the media, created this storm of noise.
A perfect storm of misinformation and hysteria. Jack the Ripper became less a person and more a character in this ongoing national drama. And it seemed like everyone wanted a part, making accusations, offering theories, even false confessions just to get attention.
So while most of the letters were nonsense,
They created real noise, they confused the investigation, distorted the historical record, and ultimately helped solidify Jack the Ripper not just as a killer, but as this enduring, complex myth built from dozens, hundreds of untrustworthy voices.
so let's draw the threads together. We started back in 1888 London, a city of incredible contrasts. And into its most deprived area, Whitechapel, steps a killer whose savagery shocked the world.
And exposed those deep cracks in Victorian society. We've looked at the grim reality of Whitechapel, the context of poverty and desperation. We've recounted the lives, as best we know them, of the 5 canonical victims: Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly.
And the horrific details of their deaths, that escalating pattern of violence.
We also delved into the role of the media. How it didn't just report the story, but help create the Jack the Ripper persona, spreading the name, fueling the fear, maybe even giving the killer a stage.
And the letters, the graffito, adding layers of mystery, confusion, and debate that continue even now. The identity of the killer remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries.
It does. The speculation is endless, but definitive answers are elusive.
But as we've stressed throughout this deep dive, beyond the sensational name and the enduring puzzle, it's vital we remember the women themselves.
Absolutely. We've tried to shed light on their struggles, their humanity, the conditions that made them so vulnerable. They weren't just symbols of decay, they were individuals caught in a brutal system, failed by a society that only really paid attention when the horror became too extreme to ignore.
Their stories are as important, if not more so, than the identity of their killer. The mystery of Jack the Ripper continues to fascinate, doesn't it? A dark chapter that somehow still captures the imagination.
It really does. Decades later, people are still drawn to it.
So, maybe a final thought for you listening to this. As you reflect on these events from 1888, think about who gets remembered in history and why. In these terrible crimes, our focus is so often drawn to the perpetrator, the mystery. What does that say about us? About how we relate to violence, to poverty, and the stories we choose to tell about the past, whose lives are centered and whose remain in the shadows?